Your soulmate was overwhelmed with tears after this realization. Don't scroll, listen to this, because this message is for you and it's reaching you at a very specific moment for a reason. Somewhere, someone connected to you at a soul level experienced a realization so powerful it completely unraveled them, not in a dramatic way, not in chaos, but in a quiet, overwhelming release they didn't see coming. It didn't happen in front of anyone. It happened in a private moment, when the noise of the world faded and truth finally had room to surface. Listen to this carefully. They weren't crying because they were weak. They were crying because something they could no longer deny finally clicked into place. For a long time, they tried to rationalize what they felt about you. They minimized it. They distracted themselves. They told themselves it wasn't that deep, that timing was off, that life was complicated, that emotions could be managed. But that night, or that early morning, something shifted. Your name crossed their mind without effort. Your energy felt close, familiar, impossible to push away. And suddenly they understood. They understood that what they felt wasn't temporary, wasn't imagined, and wasn't something they could control anymore. This message is for you, because soulmate recognition doesn't arrive politely, it arrives honestly. Listen to this. The realization wasn't just, I miss them. It was deeper. It was, I was changed by them. They saw clearly how your presence altered the way they love, the way they feel, the way they see connection. They realized that even in your absence, you left an imprint. That kind of awareness breaks emotional defenses. That's why the tears came. Not just tears of sadness, but tears of release, regret, gratitude, and truth all at once. Your heart needs this right now, because when someone cries over a realization like that, it means the connection reached their soul, not just their emotions. Listen to this. They cried because they saw how patient you were. How gentle your energy was. How you offered understanding without demanding anything in return. They cried because they realized they felt safest with you, even if they didn't know how to hold that safety at the time. They cried because they finally saw the difference between distraction and depth. And once you see that difference, you can't unsee it. This message is for you. That realization didn't come randomly. It came during a moment of spiritual openness, when defenses were down and intuition was louder than fear. That's when soul truths rise. The universe chooses moments like that deliberately. And after that realization, signs started appearing around them, subtle at first, then undeniable. Numbers repeating at meaningful moments. 1111 showing up when they thought about you and felt clarity instead of confusion. 222 appearing when they questioned timing but felt trust underneath. 444 when they felt emotionally exposed yet strangely protected. These weren't coincidences. They were confirmations. The universe was validating what their heart had already accepted. Listen to this. What overwhelmed them wasn't the idea of losing you, it was the realization of what you represented. You represented calm in a world that felt chaotic. You represented truth in a life full of noise. You represented a version of love that didn't require performance or fear. And realizing that hit them all at once. This message is for you, because not every connection is meant to be understood immediately. Some are meant to be felt, then realized later when the soul is ready. Listen to this. They may not have reached out yet. They may still be processing what they felt. But internally, nothing is the same anymore. Awareness changes everything. Once the heart accepts truth, the old emotional structure collapses. That's what those tears marked, the end of denial. And here's the part that matters for you. You didn't cause this by chasing or forcing or proving anything. You caused it by being aligned with who you truly are. Your growth, your healing, your authenticity sent a frequency they couldn't ignore. This message is for you, because soulmate connections activate when one soul becomes fully themselves. Listen to this and stay grounded. What comes next doesn't need to be rushed. Realizations settle before actions follow. The universe moves gently when something is meant to last. If your chest feels warm reading this, if your breath feels slower, if something inside you feels both emotional and calm at the same time, that's confirmation. Those tears were not an ending. They were a turning point. And whatever unfolds from here will feel clearer, steadier, and more honest than anything that came before. What happened after that emotional breaking point was not chaos or confusion, but something much quieter and far more powerful: clarity. Once the tears stopped, once their breathing slowed and the moment passed, they didn't feel emptied, they felt exposed in a way that was impossible to reverse. Something had been revealed to them that could no longer be pushed back into denial. Listen to this carefully. When a soulmate realization reaches the point of tears, it means the soul has accepted a truth the mind was resisting. After that moment, they began to notice how different everything felt. Their thoughts about you no longer came with resistance or excuses. They came with stillness. With honesty. With a sense of "this matters" that didn't need justification. This message is for you, because awareness always arrives before action, and action always follows awareness, just not on human timelines. Listen to this. In the days that followed, they caught themselves replaying moments with you, not in a nostalgic way, but in a reflective one. They saw conversations differently. They understood your silences differently. They recognized how much of themselves you saw before they were ready to be seen. And that recognition carried weight. It brought a mix of humility and awe. They realized you weren't just someone they connected with, you were someone who changed how they understood love. That's not easy to accept, especially for someone who once believed they were in control of their emotions. This message is for you. After that realization, distractions stopped working. Things that once helped them avoid feelings suddenly felt empty. Conversations felt shallow. Noise felt louder. Silence, oddly enough, felt safer. And in that silence, your energy lingered, not intrusively, but steadily. Like a truth waiting to be honored. Listen to this. The universe often removes distractions when a soul is ready to face what it's been avoiding. That's not punishment, it's alignment. They also began noticing signs more clearly. Not just numbers, but patterns. Running into reminders of you unexpectedly. Hearing phrases that mirrored thoughts they hadn't shared. Seeing 11:11 at moments of internal honesty, 2:22 when they debated reaching out but felt unsure, 3:33 when reflection turned into acceptance. These moments weren't random. They were confirmations that the connection was real, alive, and spiritually guided. This message is for you, because when the universe confirms something repeatedly, it's asking for acknowledgement, not avoidance. Listen to this. Something else shifted too, their sense of responsibility. After the tears, they didn't feel the urge to run toward you impulsively. Instead, they felt the need to respect the connection. To not approach it from the same place as before. They understood that if they were going to show up again, emotionally, energetically, or physically, it had to be from truth, not fear. That awareness slowed them down in the best way. Slowness here wasn't hesitation, it was integrity. They didn't want to bring old patterns into something sacred. This message is for you. At the same time, you may have felt a subtle shift within yourself. Not excitement. Not anxiety. Something quieter. A sense of emotional release you couldn't explain. As if something loosened without effort. That wasn't coincidence. Soul connections are reciprocal. When one soul releases denial, the other feels relief. When one accepts truth, the other feels calm. Listen to this. The universe balances energy between aligned souls whether or not words are exchanged. After that realization, their inner dialogue changed. Instead of asking, "Why do I feel this way?" they began asking, "What do I do with this truth?" That's a significant shift. It means the connection moved from confusion into purpose. And purpose requires patience. That's why you haven't seen immediate movement yet. Realignment always happens internally before it shows up externally. This message is for you, because destiny never rushes what requires care. Listen to this. They also started noticing how their body responded when thinking about you. Not tension. Not fear. Calm. Groundedness. A sense of steadiness they hadn't associated with love before. That's how soulmate energy feels when it's recognized, safe, not chaotic. And realizing that challenged everything they thought they knew about connection. It made them question past choices, past distractions, past compromises. Not with regret, but with clarity. This message is for you. When someone reaches this stage, they don't forget the realization. It becomes part of their emotional structure. Even if they stay quiet for a while. Even if timing still feels delicate. Awareness doesn't disappear once it's integrated. It waits. Patiently. And here's the important part, nothing that came from those tears was wasted. They marked the end of avoidance and the beginning of honesty. Something irreversible happened in their heart. Whether the next step is communication, alignment, or simply deeper understanding, it will come from a truer place than ever before. Listen to this and stay grounded. You don't need to do anything to trigger what's already in motion. What was meant to awaken has awakened. And what awakens at the soul level always finds its way forward, gently, intentionally, and at exactly the right time. What began as clarity slowly turned into a deep internal reckoning, the kind that doesn't announce itself but quietly rearranges everything inside a person. After that realization settled, they couldn't go back to who they were before it happened. Life kept moving on the outside, but internally, something fundamental had shifted. Listen to this carefully. They started noticing how their heart responded to things that once distracted them. Old habits felt hollow. Surface-level connections no longer satisfied them. Even laughter felt different, like something was missing beneath it. And in those quiet gaps, your presence remained, not as longing, not as fantasy, but as truth. This message is for you, because when a soulmate realization reaches this stage, it doesn't scream for attention, it reshapes priorities. They began reflecting on the version of themselves you knew. The walls they had up. The fears they never admitted. The moments they pulled back instead of leaning in. And that reflection didn't come with self-pity, it came with accountability. They realized how much courage it actually takes to receive a love that feels safe. How unfamiliar peace can feel when chaos has always been normal. That understanding humbled them. It softened places that had been guarded for years. Listen to this. They didn't just realize they cared about you, they realized they respected you. Your consistency. Your emotional depth. Your ability to remain yourself without forcing connection. That respect hit them harder than desire ever could. Because respect demands growth. And growth requires change. This message is for you. After that moment, their prayers changed. Not dramatic prayers, but honest ones. Asking for clarity. For courage. For wisdom to not mishandle something meaningful. That's when the universe responded in quieter ways. Not with answers, but with reassurance. Angel numbers began appearing during moments of reflection rather than desperation. 1111 when they felt aligned instead of confused. 222 when they questioned timing but trusted the process. 444 when they felt emotionally exposed yet protected. These were not coincidences. They were signals that something sacred was being handled carefully. Listen to this. They also began to sense your energy differently. Not as absence, but as connection that didn't require proximity. They felt you during still moments, during walks, during late-night thoughts when defenses were down. And instead of resisting it, they allowed it. Allowing was the biggest shift. Because allowing meant they stopped fighting the truth. This message is for you, because once a soul stops resisting, alignment accelerates naturally. At the same time, something subtle may have been happening within you. A release you couldn't explain. A calm that arrived without reason. A sense that something was being resolved even though no conversation had happened yet. That's not imagination. That's energetic balance. When one soul accepts truth, the other feels peace. Listen to this. The universe doesn't require words to restore harmony, it works through awareness. They also became more intentional with their emotional energy. They stopped oversharing. Stopped seeking validation. Stopped running from stillness. Instead, they began sitting with their feelings, understanding them, respecting them. That maturity didn't come from fear of loss, it came from recognition of value. They understood that what you represent isn't common. And common things are easy to replace. Rare things are handled with care. This message is for you. After that realization, they didn't rush toward action, but they didn't drift away either. They stayed present internally. Watching. Listening. Preparing. Realizing that if and when they move forward, it has to come from integrity, not impulse. That pause isn't rejection, it's responsibility. And responsibility is the foundation of anything lasting. Listen to this. They also began to see you more clearly, not through projection, but through truth. They saw your strength, not just your softness. Your boundaries, not just your kindness. And instead of feeling intimidated by that, they felt drawn to it. Because strength that doesn't harden is rare. This message is for you, because soulmate connections don't just create emotion, they inspire evolution. Over time, their fear softened. The fear of timing. The fear of vulnerability. The fear of getting it wrong. Those fears didn't disappear overnight, but they lost power. Because fear cannot coexist with acceptance for long. Acceptance always wins quietly. And here's what matters most, that realization didn't fade. It integrated. It became part of who they are now. Even if they remain silent for a bit. Even if circumstances still need to align. Even if action hasn't shown up yet. Awareness has already done its work. Listen to this and stay grounded. You don't need to chase clarity or demand movement. What was meant to awaken has awakened. And when something reaches the soul, it doesn't reverse, it only moves forward, step by step, in ways that honor timing, truth, and the depth of the connection itself. What unfolded next was a period of deep internal reorganization, the kind that doesn't show on the surface but changes the entire structure underneath. After the realization settled fully into them, they stopped seeing life the same way. Ordinary moments carried weight. Choices felt more intentional. They began noticing how certain paths no longer aligned with who they were becoming, and instead of forcing themselves to fit, they quietly stepped back. Listen closely to this part, because it matters. They realized that meeting someone like you didn't just affect their heart, it confronted their readiness. And readiness is uncomfortable when it exposes where growth is still needed. They weren't overwhelmed by tears because they were losing you, they were overwhelmed because they saw the version of themselves they hadn't fully stepped into yet. That awareness can be heavy, humbling, and transformative all at once. They began asking themselves difficult questions in moments of honesty. Am I emotionally available in the way real connection requires? Do I know how to protect something precious instead of testing it? Have I been choosing familiarity over depth? Those questions didn't come from guilt, they came from awakening. This message is for you, because soulmate connections don't just create longing, they create accountability. As days passed, they became more sensitive to the emotional tone of their life. Noise felt louder. Chaos felt draining. They found themselves craving calm, not excitement. And when they thought of you, calm was exactly what they felt. That contrast became impossible to ignore. It highlighted how rare it is to feel emotionally safe with someone without effort. They realized you didn't demand energy, you offered grounding. That realization reframed everything. Love no longer felt like intensity or pursuit, it felt like peace. And peace is something many people don't know how to receive when they've been conditioned to survive chaos. This is where spiritual growth accelerated. They started noticing subtle confirmations around them, moments of alignment that felt intentional rather than coincidental. Numbers repeating during reflective moments. Words overheard that mirrored private thoughts. Songs appearing at the exact moment emotion surfaced. These weren't signs to rush, they were reminders to stay aware. The universe was confirming that the awakening wasn't imagined. At the same time, they felt a quiet pull toward integrity. Not dramatic change, but internal alignment. They stopped entertaining situations that felt empty. They became more selective with their time, their words, their emotional availability. That selectiveness wasn't avoidance, it was respect. Respect for themselves and for what they felt with you. This message is for you, because when someone reaches this phase, they no longer play with feelings. They handle them carefully. They also became aware of how your presence changed them without trying. You didn't fix them. You didn't rescue them. You simply existed as yourself, and that authenticity challenged them to be honest about their own. That's why the realization was so emotional. It wasn't about romance alone. It was about truth. And truth has a way of dissolving illusions that once felt comfortable. Over time, their inner dialogue softened. Instead of judging themselves for the past, they began forgiving themselves. Forgiveness opened space. Space allowed clarity. Clarity made room for intention. This progression doesn't happen quickly, and it doesn't happen for everyone. It happens when a connection reaches the soul instead of stopping at attraction. Meanwhile, you may have felt a subtle sense of release during this period. Not relief, not excitement, just a feeling that something heavy was no longer yours to carry. That wasn't coincidence. When one soul accepts truth, the energetic load equalizes. The universe balances what was uneven. That's why you may have felt calmer without knowing why. This message is for you. Their awareness didn't fade with time, it matured. It became less emotional and more grounded. Less reactive and more intentional. That's when realignment begins. Realignment doesn't always bring immediate action, it brings preparation. They understood that if they were to move forward in any way, it had to be from a place of honesty, not fear. From clarity, not impulse. That understanding slowed them down, but it also strengthened them. They weren't backing away, they were stepping inward. And stepping inward is often the prerequisite for stepping toward something meaningful. As this phase continued, fear lost its grip. Fear of timing. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of not being enough. Those fears didn't disappear overnight, but they stopped being in control. Awareness replaced avoidance. Presence replaced distraction. That's the quiet work that happens after tears dry but truth remains. This message is for you, because what they felt wasn't temporary emotion, it was a turning point. And turning points don't always come with immediate movement. They come with irreversible clarity. Whatever unfolds next will come from this clarity, not from confusion. And clarity, once integrated, always moves forward in ways that honor depth, timing, and the soul-level significance of the connection itself. What followed that deep internal reckoning was a quiet but undeniable shift in how they carried you within their heart. The emotional storm had passed, but in its place was something steadier, something far more serious than longing. They no longer questioned why you mattered. Instead, they began to understand how you mattered. That distinction changed everything. You weren't a feeling to be managed anymore, you were a truth to be respected. In the days that followed, they noticed how their emotional reactions softened. They weren't overwhelmed anymore, but they also weren't detached. It was as if their heart had reorganized itself around a new center. They found themselves more present in their own life, yet strangely more connected to you at the same time. That's the paradox of soul recognition. It doesn't pull you away from yourself, it brings you closer. They began seeing their past choices with new clarity. Not with shame, but with honesty. They recognized moments when fear spoke louder than love, when timing felt like an excuse rather than a reality, when avoidance felt safer than vulnerability. That awareness didn't crush them, it humbled them. Humility opened the door to growth. Growth invited responsibility. Responsibility made the connection feel sacred instead of overwhelming. They understood that whatever you represented deserved to be handled with care, not impulse. As this realization settled, their emotional energy became more intentional. They stopped feeding distractions. They became quieter, more reflective, more selective about where they invested themselves. Not because they were shutting down, but because they were aligning. Alignment has a way of simplifying life. Noise fades. Clutter falls away. What remains feels meaningful. And in that space, thoughts of you felt calm, grounded, and unmistakably important. They also began noticing how their body responded when they thought of you, not tension, not anxiety, but steadiness. A sense of being anchored rather than stirred. That physical response surprised them. Love had always felt intense or uncertain before. This felt different. This felt safe. Safe enough to build something real. Safe enough to stay present without running. That realization reframed their entire understanding of connection. They weren't afraid of loving you. They were afraid of mishandling something pure. That fear didn't push them away, it slowed them down. Slowing down was an act of respect. Meanwhile, subtle signs continued appearing around them. Not urgently, but consistently. Numbers repeating at moments of inner truth. Songs surfacing that mirrored what they hadn't said out loud. Conversations overheard that felt like answers to silent questions. These weren't instructions, they were confirmations. The universe was affirming that the shift inside them was real. At the same time, you may have felt something change within yourself. Not excitement, not sadness, just a deeper sense of calm. As if something that had been pulling at you quietly let go. That release wasn't imagination. When one soul integrates truth, the energetic bond stabilizes. Balance replaces tension. You didn't need words for that to happen. Souls communicate without language. As time passed, their inner dialogue evolved again. They stopped asking if the connection was real and started asking what kind of person they needed to be to honor it. That question marks maturity. It means they moved beyond self-centered emotion into shared consideration. They didn't want to approach you as they once were. They wanted to approach you as someone who could offer presence, honesty, and consistency. That desire created internal change long before any external movement. This is where many connections fail, when realization doesn't lead to transformation. But here, transformation was happening quietly, intentionally. They weren't rushing toward a grand gesture. They were building something inside themselves first. That internal work matters more than timing. Timing can adjust. Character must be cultivated. And that's exactly what was unfolding. They became more patient with themselves, more forgiving of their past, more open to growth. Fear still existed, but it no longer dictated their choices. It became something to acknowledge, not obey. That shift gave them strength. Strength doesn't announce itself loudly, it shows up as steadiness. And steadiness is what lasting connections require. As this phase continued, the connection felt less fragile and more resilient. It no longer felt like something that could be lost easily. It felt rooted. That rootedness brought peace. Peace replaced urgency. Urgency had always distorted things before. Peace clarified them. From that clarity, intention formed naturally. Intention doesn't always act immediately, but it always prepares the way. Whatever comes next, whether conversation, reunion, or a meaningful shift in circumstances, will rise from this place of depth rather than emotion alone. And that matters. Because when something is built from depth, it doesn't collapse under pressure. It holds. What began with tears has now become something quieter, stronger, and far more enduring. And this phase, this steady integration, is what allows the story to move forward with honesty, care, and the kind of emotional grounding that can actually sustain what the soul recognized in the first place. What emerged after that steady integration was a moment of courage that didn't feel loud, but felt true. They began to notice how honesty wanted space in their life. Not confessions shouted into the open, but a quieter truth that asked to be lived. This was the stage where intention started shaping behavior. They chose differently. They paused before reacting. They listened more than they spoke. They became aware of how words could either protect or damage something meaningful, and that awareness guided them with surprising gentleness. It wasn't that they suddenly had all the answers, it was that they stopped hiding from the questions. When thoughts of you surfaced now, they brought resolve rather than confusion. Resolve to be present. Resolve to be real. Resolve to not repeat patterns that once felt automatic. That resolve settled into their body as calm focus, the kind that keeps a person steady when emotions rise. They began honoring small rituals of clarity, journaling in the early morning, taking long walks to let thoughts breathe, sitting in silence instead of filling it. In those moments, your energy felt close, not pressing, simply accompanying them like a steady current. That companionship without demand taught them something important. Love doesn't rush when it's right, it aligns. As days passed, they noticed how their values rearranged themselves. Consistency mattered more than charm. Integrity outweighed excitement. Emotional availability felt essential, not optional. These weren't rules imposed from outside, they were insights earned from within. And with each insight, fear loosened its grip. Fear of vulnerability softened into respect for it. Fear of being seen transformed into readiness to be known. They realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was choosing honesty anyway. Subtle confirmations appeared as encouragement, not pressure. The world seemed to echo their internal alignment with gentle nods. A phrase overheard at just the right time, a song lyric that articulated what they couldn't, a clock glance that landed on repeating numbers when their thoughts felt especially clear. These moments didn't command action, they affirmed direction. Meanwhile, you may have felt a corresponding shift, a steadier sense of presence in your own life. The pull of uncertainty weakened. Decisions came easier. Boundaries held without effort. You didn't need to interpret signs or analyze outcomes. You trusted your inner pace. That trust was magnetic. It created a quiet openness that allowed life to meet you without resistance. On their side, the desire to protect the connection grew, not possessively, but respectfully. They understood that something delicate doesn't need guarding by walls, it needs care through consistency. Care showed up in how they spoke to others, in what they allowed into their emotional space, in the way they managed stress rather than letting it spill outward. They were learning stewardship of the heart. Stewardship is patient. It's attentive. It chooses long-term truth over short-term relief. As this stewardship deepened, self-forgiveness became easier. They stopped replaying missteps with harsh judgment and started extracting lessons with compassion. Compassion widened their capacity to hold complexity without collapsing. That capacity matters. It's the difference between wanting connection and sustaining it. They also noticed how their sense of time changed. Waiting no longer felt like loss, it felt like alignment in progress. They trusted that what needed to be said would be said when it could be received well. That trust removed pressure. Pressure had always distorted things before. Without it, clarity breathed. In this phase, imagination gave way to planning, not rigid plans, but an orientation toward reality. They imagined conversations rooted in honesty, not performance. They envisioned presence that felt steady, not dramatic. They pictured a connection that could exist in ordinary days, not just peak moments. This grounded imagination is a hallmark of maturity. It means the heart is preparing for life, not escape. You, too, may have felt more available to the present moment, less preoccupied with what might happen, more engaged with what is. That engagement sharpened your intuition. You noticed when something aligned and when it didn't. You chose rest when needed. You spoke truth gently. You allowed uncertainty without self-critique. These choices created space. Space invites alignment. As alignment strengthened, both of you felt a subtle easing, like tension leaving the room. The bond didn't demand attention anymore, it held quietly, confident in its own coherence. This confidence wasn't arrogance, it was stability. Stability allows movement to happen without upheaval. And movement is approaching. Not as a rush, but as a natural next step shaped by integrity. When it arrives, it will feel unforced, almost obvious, like the next note in a melody that's been playing all along. What began as tears has matured into intention. What was once overwhelming has become workable. The story is no longer driven by emotion alone, it's guided by truth. And truth, once welcomed, leads forward with a steadiness that can carry whatever comes next. What followed this quiet courage was a period of emotional honesty that reshaped how they related not only to you, but to themselves. They began noticing how often they had once edited their feelings to stay safe, how many times they had chosen comfort over truth without realizing the cost. That awareness didn't bring shame, it brought clarity. Clarity has a way of simplifying things that once felt complicated. They stopped rehearsing conversations that might never happen and started listening to what their inner voice was actually asking for. What it wanted wasn't fantasy or escape, it wanted alignment. It wanted to live in integrity with what had been realized. As this settled in, they found themselves becoming more emotionally available in subtle ways. They showed up differently with the people around them. They listened more closely. They responded with intention rather than reflex. They noticed when something felt misaligned and chose not to override that feeling. These small decisions mattered. They were proof that growth was no longer theoretical, it was active. Thoughts of you now arrived with a sense of responsibility rather than longing. Responsibility to honor what the connection revealed. Responsibility to not reduce something meaningful to nostalgia. Responsibility to be someone who could meet depth with depth. That responsibility didn't feel heavy. It felt grounding. It anchored them. At times, they reflected on how rare it is to encounter a connection that doesn't demand performance. With you, they didn't feel the need to impress or defend. They could simply exist. Realizing that changed how they understood intimacy. Intimacy wasn't about intensity or constant closeness, it was about safety and presence. This understanding made them more selective with where they placed their energy. They withdrew from situations that felt performative or draining. They chose environments that supported calm and authenticity. This wasn't isolation, it was alignment. Alignment tends to look quieter from the outside, but internally it creates spaciousness. In that space, intuition spoke more clearly. They sensed when it was time to wait and when it was time to prepare. Preparation showed up as emotional housekeeping. Clearing unresolved feelings, forgiving themselves for past misunderstandings, letting go of narratives that no longer fit. Forgiveness here wasn't about forgetting, it was about freeing emotional energy to be used wisely. You may have felt this shift indirectly. A sense of emotional lightness. A feeling that something had resolved without explanation. A calm confidence that didn't depend on outcomes. That wasn't coincidence. When one person integrates truth, the energetic field between connected souls stabilizes. Balance replaces tension. As this balance held, their sense of fear continued to soften. Fear of vulnerability gave way to respect for it. Fear of missteps transformed into patience. They accepted that growth unfolds at its own pace and that forcing clarity only delays it. This acceptance allowed them to stay present without urgency. Presence is powerful. It removes the need to control. Without control, authenticity thrives. Authenticity is what they were moving toward now. They imagined what honesty would feel like, not dramatic confessions, but simple truth spoken calmly. They considered what it would mean to approach connection with steadiness rather than anticipation. These reflections weren't plans, they were calibrations. Calibrations prepare the heart for what can last. Over time, they noticed how their emotional resilience increased. Discomfort didn't derail them. Uncertainty didn't consume them. They could hold complexity without collapsing into doubt. This resilience wasn't learned from books or advice, it was earned through experience. Through sitting with feeling long enough for it to teach rather than overwhelm. As resilience grew, so did confidence. Not confidence in outcomes, but confidence in their ability to navigate whatever unfolded. That confidence reduced pressure on the connection. Pressure had once distorted perception. Without it, clarity remained. Meanwhile, you continued living your life from a place of grounded awareness. You weren't waiting or watching. You were present. Engaged. Open. That openness didn't broadcast need, it communicated readiness. Readiness attracts alignment. Alignment sustains connection. When readiness and alignment meet, movement becomes inevitable, not rushed, not forced, simply natural. The story now felt less like a question and more like a path forming underfoot. Not every step was visible, but direction was clear. Direction doesn't require certainty, it requires trust. Trust had been cultivated quietly on both sides. As this phase matured, gratitude appeared, not as sentimentality, but as respect for the process. Respect for what the connection revealed. Respect for the timing that allowed growth rather than damage. Respect for the self that emerged stronger and wiser. Gratitude signals completion of a lesson. Completion doesn't close doors. It opens them responsibly. Whatever comes next will rise from this foundation of honesty and steadiness. It will feel congruent with who you are now, not who you were before the realization. And when it arrives, it won't need dramatic validation. It will feel right in the body, clear in the mind, and calm in the heart. That's how you'll know the journey has done its work. What finally takes shape at this point is a sense of emotional completion that doesn't announce itself with fireworks, but settles in like a deep breath you didn't realize you were holding. The connection no longer feels unresolved or suspended in uncertainty, it feels integrated into the fabric of who you both have become. For them, this integration brought a surprising calm. They stopped replaying moments in search of answers and started recognizing how those moments shaped their capacity for truth. The realization that once overwhelmed them with tears now rests quietly, like a steady light rather than a sudden flash. They understand now that what you awakened in them was not meant to rush toward immediate resolution, but to guide lasting change. That understanding altered how they approach everything, relationships, decisions, even themselves. They no longer feel the urge to prove or protect, they feel the pull to be present. Presence became their anchor. In presence, fear has little room to grow. In presence, honesty feels safer than avoidance. They notice how grounded they feel when they imagine approaching life with the same authenticity they felt with you. That grounding isn't dependent on outcomes, it's rooted in self-respect. Meanwhile, you may sense a quiet confidence rising within yourself. Not excitement, not anticipation. Just a steady assurance that whatever unfolds next will meet you at your level of growth. You're no longer bracing for disappointment or chasing clarity. You trust your inner compass. That trust didn't come from certainty, it came from endurance. You've learned that feelings don't need to be rushed or silenced, they need to be understood. Understanding has given you stability. Stability has given you peace. As both of you stand in this place, the connection feels less like something hanging in the air and more like a foundation beneath your feet. Foundations don't demand attention, they support movement. And movement now feels possible without strain. For them, this means readiness to act with intention rather than impulse. For you, it means openness without attachment. This balance is rare. It's what allows alignment to enter without disrupting peace. You may notice how life seems to respond more gently now. Conversations flow with ease. Decisions feel less complicated. Even waiting feels different, less like delay and more like preparation. That shift is not accidental. It's the result of inner alignment rippling outward. As this alignment holds, gratitude emerges naturally. Gratitude not for confusion or pain, but for transformation. Gratitude for what was revealed, refined, and released. Gratitude for becoming someone who can hold depth without losing balance. This gratitude doesn't cling to the past, it honors it. Honoring the past frees the future. With this freedom, possibilities expand quietly. Whatever comes next, whether a renewed connection, a meaningful conversation, or an entirely new chapter, will feel congruent with who you are now. It won't ask you to shrink or compromise. It will meet you where you stand, grounded and aware. That meeting won't feel dramatic. It will feel natural. Like something aligning rather than arriving. This is how journeys complete when they've done their work. Not with abrupt endings, but with seamless transitions. You don't lose anything by reaching this place, you gain clarity, peace, and readiness. Readiness is the true gift of the process. From here, life moves forward with a steadiness that doesn't need reassurance. You trust the unfolding. You trust yourself. And that trust creates space for what belongs to enter gently, honestly, and at the right moment.